the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today we are flying across the country to Orlando to hang out with Edwin Martinez. Edwin, welcome to the show.
Hello, Dr. Jenn Zahrt. Thank you so much
Hello.
for having me. It's an honor to be here representing all the Latinas and the Latinx dolls across the world, especially during Pride Month. Happy Pride. We love the girls and the days and the dems and everything in between.
Yes.
I'm so happy to be here.
And most people know you online as Claimed Paradise, but today you're showing up as Edwin, so welcome.
Bare face, bearing it all.
I do love your style, though. I love it when an astrologer can show up like with 100% fashion sense, you know?
My main vessel toward astrology was finding what to speak about while filming very long makeup looks. So like if I was doing like a whole 1 hour makeup look, I tried to do the quick, cheap astrology and I was like, oh wow, I know nothing to fill this 1 hour void. So that's what actually forced me to like find Chris Brennan and Demetra and really like sink my teeth in, because like I only got through the Parker astrology book and I was like, okay, we need to go deeper, and that's like the 7 hour timeline of astrology. And I was like, okay, now we're here.
I love that. I love that. Now I want to go to the beauty school and learn how to do the looks and then wax lyrical with the astrology with you. Super awesome.
That's the niche. That's literally the wheelhouse that I've been developing. So the School of Beauty and Astrology will definitely be there. It's coming.
Yay! Okay. So back to the Within Orb constellation. I would love to know, what was your first astrology book?
I had to cheat a little bit here because I'm so Latina. I didn't have access to a book, but I had access to a TV show called 12 Corazones, which translates to 12 Hearts. And like there would be these little description of the zodiac signs that like each dating person would go. Like it was this dating show with this super fierce doll in a red dress and a black, beautiful long hair. And she would pair the signs together. So it was like basically like early synastry, using the sun sign and like who would match. And I was always looking out like, who's the couple for the Scorpio? She only knew the Scorpion. So I was like, who's the couple for the Scorpion? And she wasn't looking at the girls, So it was my first exposure like to the Venusian aspect of like relating the aesthetic to the symbol. That was like my first aspect, like the connection with symbology. And I don't know if you know him, but the late and great Walter Mercado, he had this just flamboyant show where he would have fireworks open and like the 12 signs show up. And that was a part of our island's culture. So like we would sit down and watch Walter and watch for all the 12 signs. And he was literally bringing together the folkloric, like curanderismo and santeria and like even Hinduism and Buddhism. Like he was melting all of this together. And he was first and foremost in his book, Walter Mercado, El Mundo de Secretos de Walter Mercado. He actually speaks about the decans, like early on, like that book launched in like 2007, 2006. So I was like, so you were getting into some deep astrology in order to like even be breaking this down. And he breaks through every different kind of astrology. And he was really like the first icon that I would have seen, because in Latin America, he was a muse. Like he was adored and revered as a saint, to the point where the opening of that first book, Jen, has a hymn to him. Orphic style hymn about Walter el Celestial, Walter de las Estrellas. Like it is stunned. It's everything.
I love that. Oh my God. I had no idea. That's why I love like reaching into other linguistic areas and like having you share this back and like illuminate how many amazing things are, hidden behind this language barrier,
And coming from Puerto Rico, like I come from this dialect of Spanish that isn't even like registered in the dictionary yet. So seeing and bridging this, like having the flow of the United States and like its culture arrive in Puerto Rico, and like even the crosswords of words and like cute tongue-in-cheek ways that he would talk about the zodiacs that were these, like aphorisms that were very Puerto Rican, So he was the first one that like had a twang to giving a delineation that I kind of looked for. And you can see it in his book. He has this story tale, about him going to Dominican Republic and seeing these two witches at war. And by the time he got to the other side, the radio was saying that the other witch had gotten into car accident. Like he was in that tea, very similar to, Marsilio Ficino, who is very
Ooh.
lively also in his, like penmanship.
Yeah.
So I kind of gravitate toward those people who are giving their personality, into their text, similar to, my vibrant way of being. So that was fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that through line and that like integral consistency. So, I'm learning actually, the more I have this conversation, the more people are super excited to get the time to read the books that they're going to take with them. So I'm like, okay, it's not like a punishment that you're going to some like strange remote island. It's actually maybe more like the astrologer's vacation come true. So here we go. I'm going to stick you in a remote, deserted island, and you get to take, in addition to the ephemeris, 3 books with you. What are you bringing with you and why?
Yes, let me confirm the name of this one that has been like my latest favorite. I don't want to, botch the author's name. I kind of live for them. I want to respect their work. And the first one that I would take is by Allan Kardec. It's called The Book of Selected Prayers, like El Libro de Rezos Seleccionados. And it comes from the basis of what brought me to astrology, which is espiritismo, which is this folkloric, practice with the Catholic hymns and engaging with the dead and with the ancestral, and a form of venerating using these holy prayers that were essentially made to hide behind the geist of oppression and the geist of Spaniard, conquered, los conquistadores. So these hymns were essentially developed by Allan Kardec, and they were used by the folk people of the Caribbean, of Dominica Republicana, of Cuba, specifically Puerto Rico, where you see this style called mesa blanca, which is called white table, where you would sit down together. You get a beautiful white bowl of water. You light 2 candles. It's very pure. You get the agua florida and it's white flowers and petals only. Everyone cleanses themselves and you all sit together and have the small, tiny little book in candlelight, and you're just saying the hymns while the person at the top knows them. So they're just ripping through the hymn and you're like trying to keep up and have this visceral experience where Marsilio talks about the nature of like the words and how they can evoke a spirit. That was my first like exposure to occultism. It was literally using and saying these divine prayers, quite literally, to evoke a state of being where these spirits could interact with us. So if I had to be on the island, I'm like, I gotta know about the dead. I gotta make sure that the dead are cool with me. And I gotta make sure that the dead, like, I can talk to my goons and I can make sure that they're blessing me. So that was my first. And it's been one that, before we came on, I was talking to you that I was translating a lot because I haven't seen these prayers be used besides of like the esoteric folkloric like sites that were, archived in the 2000s. So I only find it in the Wayback Machine where these people write them. So it's been very fun to see like the old style, like HML sites that had them with like the Taino information. I really want to bring them into vogue and like translate them into English because it reminds me a lot about like, how Agrippa works with the daimon and like the holy guardian angel. This is the basis in which like my folk people connected with their guardian angel without having technical praxis, only, speech and like Caitlin Kopic calls it the altar of the heart, where one would just connect their spirit to the intention.
So you're translating these fresh.
Yeah, literally, like with my clients that I'm working, like working a lot of the lunar stuff, like I literally take it myself and I'm like, okay, let's sit down and see how this would fit and best be translated. Because as I was talking to you, like the early translations of even the structuring of the sentence, you can tell was just like copied, pasted, and translated. So it doesn't even read with the same essence as like the Spanish does. And I've noticed that a lot, that it kind of lacks that flavor and even nuance with word selection is the best way that I can tell it. I'm no translator, but like this is my first little moment of like bringing it from Spanish into English in a way that evokes the same essence that I feel. Cause like talking Spanish too, like there's so many more words that I can use that I can't use in the English language. But with these words, like learning and even getting to the selection of a word was something that reading manual and ancient texts helped me. Like that's something that I kind of wanted to talk about. The caliber at which these ancient manuscripts are read at and the ability and dexterity that one must have to understand them, let alone like practice them, was something that like I gained so much respect for even doing that small translation of these words because I'm like, oh, you really have to consider, you
Mhm.
know?
And that's a word that's rooted in the stars, consider. So
Oh,
you have it right there. Yeah, no, and what you're talking about, you say you're not a translator, but you're speaking to the heart of translation directly. I mean, you're in it without maybe like recognizing that. So I want to recognize that because literal translation is a little almost dead. You can just say, oh, here's a thesaurus and I'm going to put that word, that word, that word. But to evoke the sense of it, that might not be the literal word choice, but you can actually transmit the meaning with other words that are appropriate in English to get to that meaning, like that is brilliant.
and you can see that also in the way that we get conflated with even traditional texts and how people are not able to take that like verbose Dorothean sentence and distill it to something that actually has meaning in the context in which they're searching. And that was something like Austin Kovic really harped on when we were going in like the year 3 with these bodies of text. That is what really exposed me to like Abu Mashar, Marsilio Ficino, like really getting into that. And then the other person that exposed me to really advancing in like sitting with these sentences was Dr. Alomi with his translations and like getting into the Albanian corpus. And you're just like, oh, girl, like first you have to consider the translation in which you're reading. And that in and of itself being like a whole conversation that like has its own space and time. But coming as someone who wasn't exposed to this high caliber of literature, like I just learned English, in 3rd grade, I'm like, oh, wait, like we must consider and really sit with even why this author chose to do this translation if we're going to like engage with it in a critical way.
Right. And we can see their blind spots as well because every translator has a cultural frame.
Agreed.
And, arguably coming from a non-English speaking background, you are poised to be able to see what people are doing with astrology in English that we can't see and actually say, hey, you guys have this blind spot.
And it's so interesting because exposing myself, as I was talking to you earlier with Julia from Oculta, to these Catalonian manuscripts, there's so much closer to like the English and also the Latin that you get this interesting nuance in even like the Picatrix itself. Like that was one thing when like she was even explaining to me, she's like, yeah, like the Catalonian version of the Picatrix is nothing like the current English translated one. And I was like, oh, and that's something that Dr. Liana Saif is about to change. As she just said, she was about to do her like publication of the Picatrix, the Gaia Al Hakim's version. That's something as someone who didn't have exposure to like academic like work, it's really inspired me to like look forward to high quality education, and translations that even are pushing the forefront of like what hindsight did as this, conclave of people who were coming together to translate as I understand it. So it's very exciting to like partake in the historical advancement of that and see how it changes the scope of the astrology and the conversations around it.
Right. And it's entirely possible that retreats at CAELi will be the next, not next hindsight, because it'll be the CAELi version of whatever translation movement it is. It doesn't need to be the
That
next
would be
anything.
so exciting. A Spanish Catalonian translation. Oh.
Imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support CAELi before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the CAELi Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.caeli.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support CAELi into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show. Well, and with the Picatrix as well, people really love that text for the astrological magic it contains, and they often completely ignore the Shams al-Ma'arif because you can't take the Islamicate culture out of it the way that you can strip out a lot of the brown from the Picatrix.
No one can see me, but I am moving in ways that I are inexplainable because I'm holding in my content. Because our friend Marsilio Ficino lightly touches on this by always mentioning the work of the Arabics, the work of Indians, and that was something that reading his text, a lot of people don't understand that he's referencing his, good friend Ibn Ezra and these like literal Arabic texts, which in his empire of library, he would have been able to easily access and reference. And a lot of the natural magic that creates the basis of Ficino's philosophy and divine names in the context of having all of these different divine names be discovered in the Greek world, his book on the nine suns, you're like, very interesting that the Arabic world would have had this same context with Il Alam Huruf, which then exchanges into this Judaic world that does the same thing with the Hebrew divine letters, where the same context and history is being followed through the different geographical lens that you look at. And like Marsilio was one of the only, grimoire texts that's like doing that light nod to the Arabic world that essentially created the bed of temperament and the bed of like psychology, if we really are going to talk about it. And Dr. Lomi really has harped this on that like the forebearers of the Hellenistic Greco-Roman techniques would have been these Arabic, caliph dolls, these people who were really taking and putting it into theory. And maybe you can even tell me more about this as a literal historian, but like the Picatrix is like their folk practice book on natural magic and the celestial stars. Like it really sits at the core of even like the geographical landscape in which it was written. And starting to see like the Albunian context, the divine letters, like you start to understand the different themes that all of these authors were expanding upon in their little like piece of the book,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That was something that was very interesting to kind of scope around the people that were writing during the Picatrix. I'm going to definitely botch his name, but the person who inspired Abu Mashar essentially to start astrology, Tibin Ibn Qurra, who was essentially a talisman maker, like you get to see how like you can never really pull apart the folk practice and connecting with the celestials to the technique that was essentially pulled to do that efficiently.
You can't sort of create it in a secular context and strip it out of spirit.
And that is something that I kind of gagged because I want to get his because there's a couple of Robs, so I want to make sure I get it. Mr. Rob Han spoke about like the way that psychological astrology has been overdone. Like for him to even root it back to you're using the wandering seven to make sense of this that's inherently spiritual is something that you'll see Ficino kind of like do his whole theosophy and life on, that connection to the natural magic. And even once again, back to what you and me love, which is aesthetics, adorning your way in such manner that you can connect with them easily, that you can gather latent virtues and things that are of similar nature. And that for a makeup artist just then becomes that much more interesting. And now getting into cosmetic making, adding those like virtues that Ficino would have distilled from the Picatrix in such a perfect manner, taking that grimoire, turning it into medicine. I'm like, can we take these three graces combination and effectively make cosmetic glamour a true armor of Venus now?
Oh, yeah. Alchemical, astrological cosmetics. I'm like having goosebumps now, like full body goosebumps.
And shout out to the muse, the mage who has taught me and opened this, Caitlin Kopic, and also Julia over the last couple of months. Like her work on animism with occulta has really pushed me to consider, like the orris root and the glamour behind it, the ivy leaf, and the way that the iris can get grounded into the powder. Like that was the way that I immersed myself into Ficino's famous Three Graces combination, as you would know. And like, that's my third book. I'm like, I would take that. And I would take that with the book by, I would say it because this blends us in, Daniel Schulke, Arcana Viridia. It's basically this book with all of the plants and their occult virtue and planetary like symbol, like an essence and a little recipe from like the occult world about it. So it's a very, very fun thing where you see now I'm like, I can call down the spirits. I can make sure I can get my three graces and my little comedic touch from Ficino. And I can identify the plants and the actual, ecosystem that I'm going to be around. I'm trying to be cunning here,
Right. So basically, by the time someone finds you, you're going to have this whole entire, magical cosmetic industry going where...
I'm like, would you like a pearl wash? Like we're making exfoliant. We've grounded the pearls only during Venus hour while she was culminating in the middle of the night with a waxing moon. Like that has essentially been my container to test my folkloric recipes. Because at the end of the day, an espiritista is meant to serve his community. So, like, even going to these women that know nothing about the stars, nothing about astrology, will never get to know who Ficino is, but being like, hey, these next 6 hours are amazing for you to take the bath that will allow you to be in the lunar sphere and work the home a little better. Take a look at that bath, throw it in the floor wash, and mop the home as the moon wanes and throw that bucket of water out. But what happens when you're doing that according to this planetary scheme that was essentially exclusive to a lot of Western exalted, ways? The only other place where I have seen it, Jen, has been through a lot of hoodoo and folkloric ways that these almanacs of moon calendars were still being used by the folk people of the Americas. So, like, you would see in the same way that, like, astrology and that, like, small way of using it, the dead use it still to this day because that's how I found astrology. My muerta was literally like, on a full moon, put a bowl of water with a crystal in it. That is an electional protocol. Like, you have to make sure the moon's out. You have to make sure that she's shining as bright as she can. So that was my first like exposure to astrology, which wasn't technical, and it was using visual phenomena, which is inherently astrology, through occult and necromantic ways. So like my introduction to this isn't inherently technical and will never be because that's not the way that like my practice kind of developed and my initiations went down.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, but I love that the recognition of how astrology really does infuse literally most of human culture in some form. That's the blind spot of this podcast, actually, is that the most amazing conversations happen when they're not about books.
And the like the context where books are inspired by these conversations which want to capture that moment and capture the essence and the importance of it. And like for you and me, it kind of stems to like the oral traditions and their sacredness and being oral for the same reason, and our ability to now come together over our shared desire and findings over these ancient books, like, is something that like inspires me and inspire the community that like I exchange in because a lot of these people will turn a blind eye to really sitting with a book for, a summer. Like I've read those 3 books of life 3 times. It's been 2 years where I'm literally like, okay, Marsilio, let's talk about the letters and the people who are overly dry for 6 hours. Like that first book really gets a lot of people where they're like, girl, the letters for the men and the scholars, I'm not one of them. But what happens when actually typing and setting up a website and doing a blog is the modern way of being one of those people who write those letters and are overly exposed and overly dry? Like how can a cunning, folk person see what Ficino's really trying to angle and hint at with his occultism? That's my favorite part. And we have a lot of similar placements, which may be why I understand his philosophy so much. But there's a lot of hidden initiation and even his breakdown of like the Catholic scheme, similar to what Allan Kardec did that found me. So he was that author that when I found him, I was like, oh, you're a little similar to me. Like, wait, you were hiding this in plain sight from the Pope? Oh, I get what you were doing. Like I see what you were attempting to do.
And I love that you bring this up because there is a moment in being exposed to astrological text, but also practicing astrology where you realize what's not being shared. And that's when you know you've actually been initiated to a deeper level of astrological praxis, is that you can read the text and see what's on the page and you know what's not there. It's a beautiful moment to finally understand. This happened to me when I was researching Elsbeth Ebertin, one of my German ancestors, where my first exposures were simply fangirling, like, oh, Elsbeth, okay, yes, that's what you say, that's what you say. And then after about 10 years of reading her work, I realized, like, oh, she's not saying that. And she's also not mentioning that. And so I saw it from this whole different, almost like hyperdimensional perspective and realized, like, it wasn't her at all. It was always me engaging with her as a necromantic, like reviving her kind of thing, and like realizing like, oh, now I can see against her mirror where I'm growing.
And this is something that is like kind of like una espina, which is like a little spike that I have with like ancestral veneration in the West, that where we are venerating these dead authors by sitting with their texts for that long. Let's start there, like you're venerating someone who was steeped in the same occultism and the same liminality as you. But I had a client who has been jovial enough to assist me with a lot of my workings. They went to Italy, and Thema Mundi to me by Caitlin Kopic is one of the highest, synthesis of Ficino's philosophy in this current day and time. And to your point about veneration, we took 7 candles with Thema Mundi to the grave of Marsilio Ficino in gratitude for the legacy, in gratitude for, like the teachings and the unfolding of like the magic that has been made and encapsulated with his philosophy, like, and for me, that's very important because if you have somewhere you can go venerate, why wouldn't you, and the ability to take that caliber of talismanic magic, which I know he would have loved to take a tincture, a little that tincture for, it was like bridging that world of like, you may be gone, but your legacy still exists. Here's some of it, like that then followed with Pope Francis passing, and like that was part of like that last, like, look at the sinks behind the
I was
Vatican.
like, not causal, right? No.
There was an interesting working where one of like the last Sunday, that Easter Sunday, I did a whole talismanic working for the second decan of Aries, and we caught the Pope's last blessing during that Sunday sermon. Like it was visceral for me as someone who sees Pope Francis as like a figure for LGBTQ. Like he will be sanctified as a saint that accepted queer people. He was, look at how Mercury Day it is. He was seeing trans women every Wednesday and helping them and bringing him into the Vatican. It was very interesting to see the way and the ability that even his chart showed his relationship to those who were othered. And this last Sunday, I just sat there and wept as I saw like the turning of the sun. And you can see when you go to Catholic churches the way that they have an astronomical consideration for their setup. So watching that last panel rise is like the hymns were being sung, and like I looked up and like the sun's in its own decan and there's just like a solar, halo around. Like it was truly taking the Ficinian context and seeing like the golden room. And I was like, this is essentially the place and the art that Ficino would have been helping become, legacy. We think of many beautiful art and things that the Medici family created. And a lot of the things that are still, withstanding time were basically advised by Marsilio Ficino. So I think if, like one were to really want to see how deep their necromantic lens can go, see how much you can see Ficino's hiding behind those sentences. That's like a challenge
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
I've kind of like given to myself and had a lot of fruit in.
So you're triggering a memory for me when in 2002, I got my college. I went to the Gallatin School for Individualized Study, and I really wanted to spend the summer in Germany. So I said, well, I'm going to go to Europe and study alchemical texts. And they're like, okay, cool. Here's a bit of money. So I ended up living in Leipzig, Germany, where I had been an exchange student for a long time. But the family I was staying with ended up saying like, oh, well, we're going to go to Venice for the weekend. And I'm like, all about it. Marsilio Ficino's translation, the original copy, was there on display, and I got to see it in person. And I had
And you
no
see the
idea.
thing, you
I
see what
had
I mean?
no idea that was going to happen. I was just like, yeah, I'll look at the Library of Leipzig and, check out some alchemical texts. And then suddenly I'm like in Venice looking at the original translation.
That is iconic, Jen. Like that is major because like you see now even looking years later and you're like, what kind of nod was Marsilio saying? Did Marsilio say I had to bring him into my own library now? Like are those letters gonna get a re-up? A couple new translations in the CAELi Institute? Like,
Well, there is a progression time scale that links that moment in time with our moment now. So, not
ooh,
going to lie.
don't play with the Thema Mundi sync, like
Wild.
world building. And that's the beauty of seeing someone authentically take a body of work like the Picatrix and make it their own.
Right.
That's the legacy that he leaves, that like this madman who was a priest, a cardinal, an occultist, an advisor, took this alchemical text and was able to withstand one, the test of time, which tells you how much it was used, and two, would have his lover, Agrippa, really riff on him for a couple chapters of the whole thing, but that's some philosopher tea that we won't get into. And like, I really like even understanding and seeing Dr. Justin Sledge work on it. He really dives into like that timeline of philosophy, which I find fascinating, because the girls are doing also the most with aesthetics at that time. And I'm like, So, but Miss Marsilio Ficino was making the girls do it. I'm like, in my mind, they say he had this hidden room with like all of the images of the Orphic, the Orphics and like his whole secret, unknown relation to the Orphic mysteries, to your point. How much of those initiations and like teachings bled into this work?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of initiations, someone's going to come to you and say, Edwin, I really want to learn astrology. What should I read? And you're going to tell them,
I really like On the Heavenly Spheres. Really, really, really love another like series of book, Demetra Georges, Ancient Astrology, volume 1 and 2, super amazing. And then another one that I put for you is my friend Dorotheus. I think Dorotheus is a really, really fun doll to sit with. Like once again, you want to take him slow. You put a grain of salt when he starts like making very exuberant, dramatic delineations and really look at the lens of time that this person was writing in. But I think that his body of work has assisted me a lot whenever I've been stuck and I'm like, okay, I really want to go back and like see someone just bulk it out. Like he's like, here's through the 12. Like it's one of like the first nice filled books, which has a couple fragmented pieces, which is a fun part where he just goes like from Aries, breaks Pisces, and then he's like, okay, girl, let's keep going. But I think he's a fun one to really add some taste, as you can see. I like people who have a little twang to their delineation. And of course, Demetra's books really give you the ability to look at both the astronomy, the astrology, and the actual philosophy that like created the bed for what we know at this moment as Hellenistic traditional astrology. And she does an amazing, beautiful, prophetic job at it. It was one of the books, like right now, like I can show you, it's like bricked up to the ground. I loved it, really, really loved it. And it helped me a lot to understand because the worksheets in it really take you there. Like I love a good worksheet and she took me there with the worksheets.
amazing, amazing. So, what are you working on now and where can people find you?
Oh my God, do you want the real tea? Like, do you want
Are
the
you ready to share it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm finishing up Austin Coppock's Fundamentals of Astrology. I'm finishing up my year 3 project, which is Drag, a remediation using the combinations of Marsilio Ficino to administer drag to capture like the faces, the context of the face chart and the way that the faces, kind of come to life. Literally gag, like that has been my love, for the last year. I've caught 2 talismanic operations using like Arabic style, like Ilam Huruf, thanks to Dr. Lomi, which have propelled like the way that even the context of glamour magic, quote unquote, and how it's understood as something, in my eyes, still very simplistic when the art of Venus and the ceremonies and initiations that makeup was mainly used for. You go back to the Taino world where people would paint themselves so that the cacique would be able to commune with the astrological daimon that it was summoning inside of the bohío. So for me, it still comes back to like being a queer Latin gay man in the United States and the power of like you've seen me at Norwalk walking in a red Louis Vuitton with a lip and a lash and seeing how that is an armor that like repels quite literally that which is not meant to be near me. And it attracts
I
this.
was going to say, but I'm like all on it.
And there you see the
I'm like,
context of the nymph, and the way that we take the sacred rites of Venus and how in her epithets in the Iliads, she would bless these women with her adornment that was, unshakable. They had this sudden curve and this sudden sparkle. Hera herself would go and ask Venus to glamour her in order to get Zeus to pay attention to her. What happens when there's a translucent powder that is a dusting powder, like in the old ages, that was made on a beautiful fine election with the goddess in Taurus, that we start testing to see how much the veil between glamour and the initiation with Venus really dances in the modern world. And, that's one of the main kind of veils of magic that people come to. How can I make myself feel beautiful? Well, have you anointed the mirror in which you're about to reflect your image in? Like those are the dances that I'm doing right now and kind of really expanding upon. But that is the main work that I'm doing with a lovely tight group of retainer clients that like have sat and just done the whole Marsilio Ficino thing, So it's been a beautiful summer. And as you can see, we have some interesting benefic skies to test that 3 grace combination out on. So that and my zine, which you saw, which I'll be sending one to the CAELi Institute.
yay.
What's interesting is that for Taurus season, you will now see the zine break into the results from this Venus contact that has been manifesting as like the prelude to, the finishing veil to that. But they're my main work. So if anyone truly wants to embark on Glamour and the many epithets of Venus in which that comes in, I think I'm one of the right people to contact. I know a little one thing or two about that. You could tell me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your heart and your glamour and your magic and all of your intelligence and soul and
Thank you for
wisdom with
uplifting
us today.
society in this time and in this moment that it is needed more than ever. We think that the ebb and flow of history and queer history wouldn't affect us until we were here. So it's really important for queer astrology, outwardly to be put in the historical timeline. You're going against the grain, and I applaud you for that, and thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Within Orb. If you loved this episode, share it with your friends, give it 5 stars, leave a comment. In Spotify, you can do that now. To learn more about the CAELi Institute and perhaps become a member or take a lab that we teach, please go to caeli.institute. That's caeli.institute. Thanks again to the E-Block Band for providing our intro and outro music, and also to Jen Brown of JJ Boots Productions for being an excellent producer. If you would like to have a podcast be edited like Within Orb, reach out to Jen. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next week.